At this time of year, I wrote a book called The Immortal Nicholas, and it was a story that I wrote for my kids originally. And it's a story of the made-up part of Christmas. Saint Nicholas is actually real, but Santa. And I didn't want to be you can't talk about Santa, kids, it's Christmas. I didn't want to be that guy, but I also didn't want my kids to be talking about Santa and not understanding the Christmas story. And so it's called The Immortal Nicholas, and it takes you through the Christmas story and explains Santa's eternal nature, if you will. It's really my best effort to try to make sense of this time of the year. But there are so many parts of the Christmas story that we don't know or we don't really think about. And one of that is the three wise men. What were they doing leading up to the birth of the child? Who were they? When did they actually arrive? Because I wasn't in Bethlehem. And so we have Dr. Wave Nunnally. He is Evangel University professor. Is that how you say it? Evangel?
Yes.
Of Early Judaism. Go ahead.
Yes, Evangel University.
Evangel University. And are you Jewish or are you Christian?
I am not Jewish. I am Christian.
Okay. And you're over in Israel, right? Or you've been doing...
have been recently, but am now happily at home here in the United States.
Okay. So really the real history of what that was like back in that time. Who were the wise men and why are they important and what were they doing?
So the wise men are important, but they actually, Glenn, they don't show up at the birth of Jesus.
Right.
According to Matthew chapter 2, verse 16, we're told that Herod killed the babies 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. And so these guys are actually getting on the scene at least a year and a half, up to 2 years after the birth. And so really the only true birth narrative that we have is in the Gospel of Luke rather than Matthew.
Right. And so the wise men, how did they know each other? What were they doing? They were kings? What did that even mean back then?
Yeah, very good question. And the reason for me is because so many people see them. The Greek word is magoi. It's where we get the word magistrate or magnificent or magnanimous, M-A-G.
Yep.
And it basically, in Greek and in the classical Greek authors, they're using that for very important people. But for whatever reason, modern scholars have turned them into sorcerers, astrologers, diviners, and that kind of thing. And it really throws people for a loop because, what do sorcerers, diviners, and astrologers do at the birth of Jesus? And then why do we never hear about them repenting and renouncing the black arts and then embracing Jesus as the true way?
So who were they actually?
Well, there is a use of that word magoi, magi, for Persian astrologers. But there's also a version of that word that says these are really great men, like magnificent. They're great men or they're very important men. I wrote part of a book back in 2004 where I suggested that these guys were more than likely members of the Jewish community in Babylon, and that they were following not just astrology, they were following a Bible passage, Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, that says that a star is going to arise from Jacob and a scepter from Israel, scepter meaning rule. And so they're looking for the new development in their Judaism. Possibly they could have been representatives of the huge Jewish community that was in Parthia, ancient Babylon, were coming to Jerusalem to try to get their heads around what is this new development in the history of redemption.
Professor, I have a question. This is Liz Wheeler. I'm sitting in for Stu today.
Hello, Liz.
You say that there's not necessarily historical substantiation for the fact that the three wise men were astrologers. I find that fascinating because just like any part of history, the left likes to try to rewrite Christian history. Do you know when that narrative that the three wise men were sorcerers or into the dark arts, when did that emerge in that narrative emerge in history?
It's actually beginning in the 2nd and 3rd centuries A.D. The early church fathers, kind of like the disciples of the disciples, the apostles, they're beginning to suggest this as early as 100, 200 years after the time of Jesus. So it's really a long. It has a long-standing history as one approach to trying to understand who these people were. By the way, there probably weren't three of them. That also shows up not in the New Testament, but in much later writings. And more than likely, there were lots of them because, A, you don't travel in small groups, especially the kind of journey that those guys had to take over 9,000 miles to get to the land of Israel, and across a desert on the trade route at a time when there was a sort of like a Cold War going on between the Empire of Rome and the Empire of Parthia. And then you have all kinds of highwaymen that could have done them harm. So you don't travel as a small group. It was more than likely a dozen or more, maybe dozens who were traveling, and they got the attention of Herod the Great immediately because these people, these two different empires, Rome and Parthia, were in a stalemate in their war against one another, and these guys show up speaking a different language, dressed differently, and they're asking a question that bugs the heck out of him, and that is, where is he who has been born, not appointed by Rome like Herod the Great was, but born King of the Jews?
Wow. So let me go back to the beginning here with Joseph and Mary. What do we get wrong, or what do we not know about who they were?
Joseph and Mary, I think, in Christian tradition have kind of been idealized to the point that when you see them in pictures, they have halos and, they're just like super duper people that are perfect and the like, but they're normal people like you and me. And the things that the Bible does tell us and about Mary and Joseph, we tend to kind of look over because our idealized picture is so wonderful and beautiful. But we get
like
in Matthew 2, verse 19, Joseph is described as a person who is dikaios. It's a Greek word that means righteous. But you put that back into Hebrew, he was a righteous person. How do you say that in Hebrew? He was a tzaddik. And this puts him in an elite category already in his world, in his culture, that says that he goes above and beyond what God expects. And he is very well versed in the Bible, and he is very much Torah observant.
How when his wife says to him, by the way, I'm pregnant, if he's really, really devout, that's got to be a hard one to swallow right off the bat.
Yeah, it really is, because not in the law of Moses, but in the laws of the rabbis, he's got to split a hair between two opposing requirements. One is you never put a fellow Israelite open to shame. It's all but murder, and people who do that go to hell and have no chance of redemption. The other side of it is, though, that the rabbis required that if you were in a state of betrothal and your wife became pregnant by one of your friends, then you were required to divorce her. So what does Joseph do? He splits that hair perfectly, and he decides to divorce her privately. It's right there in the Bible. And it's absolutely amazing how textured this narrative is, how closely connected it is to the Judaism of the land of Israel in the first century.
Doesn't this give you also a different look at people who say, the Christmas story or the birth and everything, it's not real. We know that we know that the apostles were Jews, and it was supposed to go to the Gentiles, but it was also supposed to go to the Jews as well. And this would have been a death sentence for the story right off the bat, that they were betrothed, she was pregnant, and that's the Godhead, the baby, the result. Wouldn't that just be, that would be horrible to say in that society, right?
It is a very difficult situation that these people find themselves in. Maybe that's the reason God chose such incredibly well-prepared people for the task. You ask about Mary. Mary was a person who's described as a favored one by Gabriel. She's a virgin, and that's important in that culture. She had kept her integrity. It also she calls herself a bond slave or a bond servant of the Lord twice, and she quotes scripture by heart, and she goes above and beyond, like Joseph, the requirements of the Torah, because they went, according to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 41, every Passover she went from Galilee to Jerusalem, and women were not required to keep that law. Men, yes, but women, no. And so you've got both of these people. They're sold out. They're in this all the way, 100%. And that's I think those are among the reasons why God picked those people as opposed to maybe some less committed folks.
We're with Evangel University professor of Early Judaism, Dr. Wave Nunnally. Doctor, the idea that they had to go to Bethlehem to register for the tax, I've heard from so many scholars that didn't happen. Did that happen?
I believe that it did, Glenn. We have evidence from a first-century Jewish author named Josephus Flavius, and he records census activity taking place in the Eastern Mediterranean at this very time. There are some small differences between his account and Luke's account of the census, but we've definitely got census activity going on, and there's a reason for it. Augustus Caesar had embarked on this thing called the Pax Romana, the Roman imposed peace, and he's building the first set of interstate highways all over the world to deploy his troops, and he's trying to rid the Mediterranean of piracy. And for all of those kinds of things, building projects, etc., he's got to have money, and so he's raising it wherever he can.
It's amazing. It's always good to talk to people who actually know and have spent their life studying this. Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate it.
Hey, you're very welcome. I want to congratulate you on taking on the topic and sticking to the facts. Can I tell you a super quick story?
Real quick, yep.
Real quick. I was in Israel, as I often am, and teaching a study group, and we were at the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. And this lady said, look, after you've taken away all the myth and all the legend and no Christmas trees and no Tiny Tim and no little drummer boy corner, what are you left with? And the answer was from another person in the group was, I guess just Jesus. And that's what Christmas really is about.
It is. Thank you, Dr. Wave Nunnally. You can find him at wavenunnally.com.